to say something super cheesy like yipes, stripes. I already did. So let's talk about stripes. Let's talk about good stripes, bad stripes, whether or not stripes are reversible, and things you can do to make your stripes look their nicest. So I have 3 examples in front of me. I have stockinette stitch stripes. I have some ribbed stripes. Looks like the top of a tube sock. And then I have some stripes in garter stitch. So the first thing I want to show you is how easy it is to do stripes in any kind of knitted work. Basically, either you're working flat or you're working in the round, you literally just join the yarn up and go. So I've got my little tiny piece of cream colored knitted fabric, and I want to add in my beautiful blue. I insert my needle like I'm going to knit. Like I said, this would work in the round and it would work flat as well. I leave a tail. I always say 6 to 8 inches for your tail, so you have enough to weave in. I loop it over the needle and I work the first stitch. I just knit it. So then when I go to do the next few stitches, I kind of hold the tail under my fingers here so that it stays taut. Now we go ahead and we just work across, and when you're working in stockinette stitch or garter stitch, you're going to have super nice transition here. So looks nice. One of the things that you will find, that unless you're using what I'm going to show you in a minute as a design feature, is that stripes are not reversible. And the reason for that is because of this. So this is my beautiful piece of striped stockinette stitch. And you can see on the front how nice it looks. Everything tidy, goes from one to the other. But when we go to the wrong side and we see the reverse stockinette, you'll notice, and I'm going to grab my needle so I can point this out a little better, that when we switch colors, we get a band in between. So we switch from white to blue, there's a band, blue to white, band, or cream to blue, and the band again. So when you've got that here, obviously your fabric itself is not reversible, but some people will use that as a feature and they'll show something like that on the right side of the work. But basically, it always looks nicer on your right or your public side. Now, when we look at garter stitch in general is reversible, but when stripes, again, we're going to have the same issue. When we switch from the cream to the blue, we get that bump. When we switch back again, we get that bump. So the one way I want to show you we can fix it, we can cheat a little bit, is in ribbing. So ribbing, I've got a little sample of knit 2, purl 2 ribbing. Knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2. So if we look close up, I'm going to stretch her out a little bit. You can see here in this bottom stripe, when we switch from the cream to the blue, the cream gets in that purl row because it's just like the wrong side of stockinette fabric because we've got the purl stitches facing. The cream gets in there and it messes up our perfect lines. And then when we switch back, the blue, the cream gets in, and so you have something not pretty. But there is a super easy way to fix that. And if you look at the portion, or put our thumbs over the offending portion, when you look at the portion up here, you can see we don't have the problem. Here we've got the bad colors bleeding through here. And the only thing that I've done differently here is instead of going knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2 on this right side row where I changed the color, I knit all the way across. And then when I changed back to the cream, I knit all the way across on that first right side row. For the rest of the rib, I did it as normal, knit 2, purl 2, whatever it happened to be. But that very first row, I work as a knit. You don't get these little, these little interruptions in the color. And when you're looking at it like this, you're very hard pressed to tell where those knit rows are. Now, if I stretch this out a little bit, you can kind of see. If I flip it over, you can really see. Because down here is where we did it the normal way, where we did, and we've got our little bad things here. We've got our bad things on the opposite columns on the other side. But here you can see where I knit all across that row and I knit all across that row. On the wrong side of the work, it's all funky looking. It looks like the rib is interrupted. But on the right side of the work, you can barely tell. So that is a trick if you're doing any kind of striping in a hat and you've got striping in the ribbing, striping in the cuff of a sweater or a sock. If you knit that first right side row, just knit all the way across when you do the transition stripes. One of the things that you need to do is you need to carry your non-working yarn up along the edge. So if we look, for example, at our rib swatch, you can see where I've carried the yarn that wasn't working up along the edge. And depending on how many rows or rounds you're working, depends on how often you need to kind of secure that. I like to do it, if I'm doing more than 2 rows of something, I secure it. I secure it every 2 rows or 2 rounds. And if you're doing long sections, sometimes it's better just to cut the yarn. But for this, I'm just going to show you how easy it is to carry yarn up the side. So the next row is actually still going to be the blue. And I want to carry the white yarn up so that the white yarn is kind of tagged under here as we come up. So I'm going to insert my right hand needle as if to knit that first stitch, because the first stitch is knit. And I'm going to be using the blue yarn, so I'm going to make sure I get the working yarn. I'm going to tuck the tail out of the way so it's not bothering me. Here's my white yarn. So before I work the stitch, I want to make sure that the white yarn, cream yarn, is actually caught up in it. I don't want it to hang down here and not get, if I would just like that, it wouldn't get caught up. I want to make sure it gets caught up. So I wrap it over here. I bring this, and we can see that it's going to catch that cream yarn as it comes up. And then I just go along my row. And of course, when you're doing this, you want to stretch your edge out a little bit so that that's not pulled too tight as you're carrying it up before you do the next cream row. But that will allow you not to have to weave in ends. So I'm going to show you here. This is an example of striping where I've used 2 different yarns, and there's long sections of this magenta plummy color and shorter sections of the multicolor here. But actually I did carry the yarn up along the edge on this because when you look at it, and I actually couldn't even tell when I was showing you, there's no yarn carried here. There is a yarn carried here. And the only way you can really tell is you flip it over and you see, oh, there's that color. There's some lime green, but even when it's this way, you can barely see it. So I only had to weave in the end when I started the cowl, and I had to weave in the end when I finished the cowl, and the rest of the time I just carried it along. Same for this fuzzy yarn, and you can't even see it when it's carried along here because it's so thin and fuzzy, but that's carried along as well, so you minimize your weaving in ends. If you're doing larger sections, or if you're skipping a color for a really long time, you might not want to carry it in. You might just want to cut it, weave in that end, do the next section, so on and so forth. If you are cutting yarns as you go from stripe to stripe or from section to section when you're doing stripes, I highly recommend you weaving your ends as you go along. And the reason for that is it's very sad when you get to the finish of your project and you're like, oh, now I have to weave in 1,000,000 ends. And then everybody cries, and then you try to get somebody else to do it for you, and no, doesn't always work. So carrying along is definitely the preferred way to go. Carry it along. Make sure you do the wrap that I showed you just a second ago. But if not, weave those ends in as you go so you don't have 1,000,000 to do at the end.